You. So welcome to Type Development and the Micro Memoir. Thank you very much. Julie really wanted to present this at APTI. It got cancelled, so we benefited from that experience. So over to you, Julie.
Thank you, Susan, and welcome everyone, and thanks for being here. I'm glad that this is on the fourth day. I'm glad it is after trust, because there's a certain vulnerability that comes to writing, and I'm actually going to invite you to do a little bit of writing today, and you can share what you want in a small group. And if we have time, you can share what you like in a large group. You may only want to share your debrief of the experience in the small breakout group. That's fine. But what we're going to do is see what a micro memoir is, experience reading some, and trying our hand at writing some. And it's been a great practice for me, and I'm really excited to introduce it to my type community. So just a little bit about me. Type has been a big part of my personal and professional life since the 1980s. I've presented at several APT conferences throughout the years. I'm a business psychologist, I'm an academic, I'm a department chair of business psychology. I've also always been an aspiring writer, and that actually, when I was in analysis with John Giannini, who wrote Compass of the Soul, he kind of challenged me to write creatively and publicly. And at that time, I did not take well to that challenge. That just seemed like that's a bridge too far. I love to read. I love to write in my journal. What are you talking about? No. I didn't want to take on the cliche of the INFP writer. And then I came to the realization that this is a way to express and develop all the different aspects of myself. I started out writing fiction, but I really feel like now micro memoir is like the basic building block of my writing practice. And I think it may be for a lot of people for a lot of reasons that I'm going to share. But I just want to invite any of you to share what brought you to this session, if you would like to put that in the chat. Which I can't see.
I can read it for you though, Julie. When someone shares, I'll
Sure.
read it. I'm probably
Thank you.
putting in comments right now, I would think. So okay. I had never heard of micro memoirs before this. That's Chris. And Catherine, I've always been interested in writing. My degree is in hang on a second, is in English hand. I had published a non-fiction book. Cash, I think reflecting on myself in written form builds self-awareness. Let's see any other comments. I'm going to slide it down. Curiosity and writing longer pieces than my blogs. And John Haxton says also intrigued. Hang on. Intrigued by the idea of micro memoirs. Jane Kesey says waiting to learn from someone I haven't heard present before. Feel, and Karish says feel drawn to it. Sounds interesting. I believe I tried something similar. Sarah said, someone with ESFJ preferences, I remain dealing with a comment from many years ago. Oh, you want creative? I see this as a creative session. And Julie Wright says ditto to Jane's comments. So lots of good ideas.
Thank you so much. We're going to start with this light-hearted warm up. And we've probably all seen type acronyms. The thing about this is they're small and you can do a lot of them in a short time. I have a whole slide full of ones that I did. I used my type code. You don't have to use your type code, but what you do have to do is you have to say something that is true about you, at least in a moment, at some point. Doesn't have to be true for your whole life. It doesn't have to be what you want to put on your tombstone, but just something could be fleeting, something that is true for you using any acronym of any type code. I found it easiest just to use my own, but if you would just have something to jot those down, and don't stop at 1, don't stop at 2, as many as you can. And you can cheat. You notice that I cheated. I put certain things in parens that I didn't want to have count. And it's just for now, fellow participants, just for now.
So we've got one from John Haxton: intelligently negative, then playful. Imagining new friendship journeys from Jane Kesey. It's nice.
Oh.
Not seeing any others in yet. Everyone needs freedoms and pleasure. I'm now feeling prepared. Energetic, stable, focused journey. Wow. I love the journey word. I was wondering what to do with the J.
Yeah, and I didn't have to tell this group, you can't use variations on the real word, right? So no judging.
And we've got from Julie Wright, we've got every new friend is joyful.
Oh.
Individually nutty today, joyfully, from David. And then John Haxton: inside now, then perhaps. ...
I've never done this exercise, so I'm so excited that you're doing this. I've done it with a couple people individually just to see how it would work, but this is great.
Irony needs the punchline. Endlessly, endlessly seeking pleasure from Cash. Very nice. I wasn't sure yours, Catherine. I'm not fond of networking. Never say never. Tell me more. Patience. Oh, I see. So a sentence, a sentence, a sentence, a sentence. Yeah. Intelligent nuance. Hang on. Intelligent nuances for jokies. Eager, secure, fabulous, jolly. Oh, yeah, I got jokes. Yeah. Intrigued, never to judge. And the way of things. Very nice.
We could just do this the whole time, but I do have a few more things to share. So and you all just wrote micro memoirs, so awesome. See how easy it was for you to do that and how accessible they were, and I hope it felt good. So one of the things about creating tells us who we are, and it spurs a cycle of development and transformation. The other thing that I find developmental about writing is when you're writing with the idea that you might share this, or that your intention is to share this. And we're going to talk a little bit later about private and public writing. but you need to have range and balance and draw on different aspects of yourself. Like for me, I had to really get into the habit of concreteness that wasn't what was most accessible for me in the beginning. And that has an impact on other areas of my life. I became a better observer as a result of that. The other thing about the micro memoir is it's small and contained, and it might be more accessible than poetry, which can also be small, just because we're used to writing in sentences and paragraphs. So it's right there for us. And sharing it helps ourselves as it helps others. If you like to read, and that's the first thing that we're going to do, is do a little bit of reading. If you like to read, then you can think of writing as a way of paying that forward, particularly writing with the intention that you might one day share it. And I'm recalling my argument with John Giannini about this, where I accused him of having an extroverted bias. This is complete. Then thinking about it, it's like, well, if I'm enjoying and appreciating and getting these benefits out of reading, I maybe do owe it to other readers to also develop and share my writing. David's nodding. Thank you so much. So just what is micro memoir? Flash essays have been around for, a few decades as kind of a thing, but micro memoirs getting a little bit more specific. They are short pieces, usually more about lived experience than an issue. They're condensed and compressed. They're infused with perspective, again, accessible and rewarding to read and write, and can reflect, express, and catalyze personal insight and development. So I have an example, and you may have seen this if you looked at the handout of the PowerPoint that I posted, but I want to just read this one. This is called The Coming of Age, and it's by Beth Ann Fennelly, who is the poet laureate of Mississippi. That's a thing here. We were vacationing on a small lake in Canada. I'd walk the pine needle path to the store, the kind of place lichened with shingles, bell on the screen door, bowl of water for the store dog, the kind of place that sold a bit of everything, beef jerky and buttons and shoe polish and flypaper. I cased the tiers of candy. I was 6, would have been happy eating nothing but pixie sticks and pop rocks and bottle caps. Lick-O-Made, Fun Dip, and candy cigarettes that gave a puff of chalky sugar. Waiting in line, I felt a hand settle onto my head, the woman behind me conversing with the clerk. She began stroking my hair. I waited, obedient, patient, to pay, and the woman continued chatting and stroking, rhythmically, unhurriedly. My hair an instrument she strummed to lyrics about summer traffic, worse than last year, eh? And did you hear Mary's eldest is moving home? Then it was my turn, and as I addressed the clerk, the woman behind snatched her fingers back as if they were scorched. Oh, she cried, and I turned. I'm sorry. I'm terribly sorry. I thought for a minute you were my daughter. I gazed at her, surprised only at her embarrassment. Of course she'd want to pet me. Diet of nothing but sweetness, expectation of nothing but affection. You can imagine what this world would make of me. So what do you notice about this?
Lots of sensing, lots of sensing detail.
Yep, and a lot of strong nouns and verbs.
How very secure and loved she feels.
Yes.
It's interesting how so much of it is just this very clear, in the moment description, but the punchline is so much bigger than that.
Yes, and I would say that is a characteristic of micro memoir. I'm not saying that that is always the case, but that is definitely a convention. If some a form this new can have a convention, because it's infused with that perspective from looking back. And it occurs to me that this was like a random memory that Beth Ann had, that she wrote down. She's a poet, so she keeps a journal. She wrote this down. She didn't necessarily know why it was sticking with her, but in coming back to it, she could make that meaning of it. That's the story that I make up about the making of this memoir. The link there has some of her others, and I included her book. She has a book with 52 of these. This is not in that book, but it's one that I really like because it illustrates a lot of things about the micro memoir. So they are 4 words, and I used to say 6 words because kind of a 6-word memoir is a thing, and I'm gonna show you a couple of those, including one that I wrote yesterday. Actually, no, I wrote the 17-word sentence. But anyway, I'm saying 4 words because you guys just wrote a bunch of 4-word ones. So I think you invented a new form. They're usually prose, even when they're poetic. They can stand alone. You don't need anything else, but sometimes they are collected with others and they have a synergy. Concrete and imagistic, as you pointed out, precise language and metaphor, moment as synecdoche. The term fractal came up in a couple of the presentations, and a fractal being that self-similarity. It's like in anything we write, as diverse as it might be, I feel like our DNA is somehow in there. And I love this Rumi quote. He said, "You're not," but I will say, it is not. A micro memoir is not a drop in the ocean, but the ocean in a drop. About images, this is a craft note that you might want later. We don't, and this is of course very Jungian, right? We don't make up images, we invite them, we notice them, and we note them. They're there, and it's anything concrete that evokes energy. Can be something objectively still and flat, but it somehow feels powerful and dynamic and accrues power throughout the piece of writing. Small, unassuming, mundane, but with grand implications. And that is actually true of the micro memoir as well. The visible tip of an iceberg connected to a huge invisible unconscious mass. So literally a complex, right? That's pretty much the definition of a complex. And a means of translating and exchanging meaning from one's psyche to others and from others to one's own. And another important thing, not always strictly visual. Like you'll notice she had other senses in there. She had touch for sure. She had taste. She had pretty much had them all. So some other forms. I you did your 4-word form. There are also 6-word memoirs. I like these: Long Lost Girl, Recently Found Unharmed, You're All in My Imagination, Mark Time Till 55, Reborn Thereafter. There's a website of these, and you can post yours right up there on them. There is also the 17 syllable sentences. So this is also in the genre of tiny essays. And this is also called the American Haiku, coined by Allen Ginsberg. One of his: put on my tie in a taxi, short of breath, rushing to meditate. And you could imagine a longer essay that meanders through that idea, right, of the irony of rushing to meditate, but he gets it all in those 17 syllables. I made my own yesterday. I had a lot of different things I was doing yesterday. I didn't have a lot of time to write, but I try to do something writing related every day. And yesterday I wrote this: can you accept the color of the sky the day you became divorced? 100-word essays is another common genre, and of course there's everything in between as well, but 100-word essays are kind of a thing, or essays that are less than 100 words, and this is one I wrote about my cat. Just a note on tense and point of view, again, just for future reference, you don't need to always use the first person. For example, you might not want to use the first person if you are writing something, ironically, very personal. It can give you some distance. Like in my example, I said you, I didn't say I. And I did it as a question, and that's a way to make some difference. Also, as you pointed out about the coming of age with the punchline, you can speak of the past as if it's present, and then move from the present of the story to the future, or the present of the present, and do creative things with the point of view. So you're not, it's creative, so you're not stuck the way that you might be in like academic writing or more journalistic writing. Are there questions so far, or comments that I should address?
There's just a few examples. For sale, baby shoes never worn, Hemingway from
Yes,
Cash
yes.
Keeley.
Yep.
Yeah,
Famous one.
and Jane said, Grandma shared taffy even with dentures. So I think it's just the comments.
Very good. A hermit crab essay, and I understand that you might not have never seen a hermit crab. You might not have them in your native land. I've never seen a hermit crab. I live in Illinois. I've lived in the Midwest all my life, but I have seen pictures, and what they do is they occupy abandoned, mostly abandoned shells from other animals. And hermit crab essays do something similar in that they take an established form, like a list, letter, email. So probably letters were the oldest form. So epistolatory kind of works. Obituaries, eulogies, menus, recipes, horoscopes, syllabi, performance evaluations, things that we are used to seeing. And you take your content that is your topic that you want to write about, your memory, your reflection, your speculation, whatever it is, and put it in the form that you're borrowing that very different kind of form. And that has several effects. One, just thinking that you're going to put something in that form tends to be disinhibiting, particularly if you have very heavy material that, again, I didn't want to be the stereotype. I didn't want to be, I have an essay in a journal called Sad Girls Club. I just love that title. But at the time when I was not wanting to do this, I didn't want to be that sad girl doing confessional whatever. But if you put it in a different form, it gives it a different valence, both for yourself as you're doing it and for the reader. And it's tricky because you don't want to necessarily, some things won't mix, and you don't want to necessarily make light of something that really should be taken seriously. On the other hand, sometimes it works really well to do this. And it's definitely something to consider if you're trying to write just a conventional essay. These forms tend to be short, and they will give you, they'll put some constraint around what you're doing that can be actually disinhibiting, because you'll have fewer decisions to make. And it can lighten things up and make them easier to write and easier to read as well. But I did want to talk, just get back to that private, personal, and public continuum. There's all kinds of research that tells us, and we're probably all familiar with it, that writing is good for us. You know, just like exercise is good for us, meditating is good for us. So it's good. It's good just to do that for ourselves. On the other hand, there is evidence that would suggest that when we do it with the intent that someone may see it, and this is a process, because you don't want to inhibit yourself in the beginning worrying about what are people going to think about what I'm writing. So you separate that part out from the idea that I'm writing this for myself, but one day I may come back to it over time. One day I may share it. One day strangers may read it. Then you are actually investing more in it. And as we know, in general, when it comes to psychological work, the more investment that we make, the more benefits that we get. And there's so much written, so much good stuff written about this, but and Pennebaker says, remember, when you sit down to write, this writing is for you and you alone. And I think that is a great thing to remind yourself of when you sit down to write, and you have to hold that opposite tension of, and one day it might be something that I share, and that can actually be motivating and can help you refine both the product and the process and yourself, and help you build your capacity. And the other end of the spectrum, Roxane Gay, who writes about some very traumatic things, says, it's my job, and I'm not just doing it to exercise my demons. I'm doing it to elicit a response from the reader and accomplish something. And that she wishes people would care more about craft when they are doing it. And you might have heard there's a lot of chatter about how with the pandemic, everybody's writing memoirs and they're all terrible. So it's a true both and. So just some prompts and inspirations. And if you have your own, that's perfect. You can just use your own. I think writing about any type development exercise experience, or any type development experience, any segment of the hero's journey, moderating the dominant function, that came up in one of the sessions. And I think that came out in Beth Ann's coming of age, that's what ultimately in that punchline, what she was talking about. I'm accessing the inferior. It goes with many of the things that we've been talking about in this conference. Other things you might think of: dual or dueling memories, past versus present, any kind of transition, bests and worsts, highs and lows, familiar, unfamiliar, inside, outside, obsessions, compulsions, attachments, arresting images, again, not necessarily only visual, synchronicity, deja vu. And I would love to know what else has inspired you that some of us might also take inspiration from in terms of prompts for writing.
So you're asking people to write something then, Julie, now, is that?
No, not yet.
Not yet. Okay, just checking.
Not yet. Thank you. Thanks for checking. No, just curious if anything else has been an inspirational prompt, because writers are often look for prompts. And if it works really well for you, you might not really be aware of it, but it might be something that can help someone else.
Julie, I was going to just say, I think David also put his hand up actually, so sorry if I've jumped in. Yeah, I was just going to say landscapes, just being outside, landscapes.
Yes. Very good.
And David said walking in nature. And Sarah said feeling strong emotions, positive and negative. And Paula has a raised hand. So Paula, do you want to?
Sure. Yeah, I took a writing class, sort of memoir, not memoir writing, but the class last year through our Access television station. And one of the prompts she gave us was where I'm from. So you start, I'm from, and it was just amazing, the range of different things that different people in the class came up with. Is really, that was a good one. And just the whole prompt thing is interesting, because I would just stare at the page and go, what am I going to do? And then all of a sudden, start writing, and you don't know where it comes from, sort of.
Yeah. And it goes back to that idea of constraints. When it is truly wide open and you have no specific prompt, it can be inhibiting. But if you have a prompt, and again, my initial response to every prompt is always, oh, I have nothing. And you do. you turn out to have a lot. And a lot of times prompt lists, and which is, again, could be one of those forms of hermit crab form.
One prompt I heard from somebody else was to just explain your name, first, middle, last name. And it was staggering just how much you could get from talking about your name.
That's great. I've not heard that one.
I had an exercise once, describe who you are without using the first person in words of one syllable. That was very thought-provoking.
And when you have a technical constraint like that, like words of one syllable, you get really interesting effects in the writing as well. And there's interesting effects in your thinking and also in the process and the product of your writing. So it's great to develop in those various ways and get that balance. It's like cross training. This and I have a handout of this. It's a basic prompt exercise, and it's where you think and you can write at the top of a paper a transition, a crisis, or a dilemma. Could be, you know, large or small, any size. And then you make columns, and the first column and the first thing to try to list is those nouns, verbs, sensations, all five senses, objects. Then you list the thoughts and emotions in another column that those evoke. And then from those, you come up with themes. And finally, you have conclusions and questions. And it's great to make these lists before you're actually writing any sentences. And again, this isn't, you should always do it this way. This is not a rule. This is a technique that you could try, and then maybe put it aside and come back and write a sentence or write a paragraph. Maybe go through a few iterations of revision, which Terry talked about revision in her session yesterday, and I have some information on that as well. So what I'd like to do is for you just to do some writing, and it could be based on this exercise. It could be some random memory, the way that I imagine Beth Ann's piece was prompted. It can be on one of those prompts that we talked about. It doesn't matter, but just to maybe make a list of a couple ideas and then just pick one and write something, and take maybe 7 minutes to do some writing.
There was one question from Chris. What kind of things are themes, Julie?
I think you can decide. I think what themes come out of, if you're writing objects and sensations and actions, and then your thoughts and emotions around them, then you could see if there are patterns to those. And those patterns might be themes. And the reason why you would note that is if you felt that that theme was resonant, then you could go back and make sure that everything was reinforcing. So you might think of it's very iterative. For me, all writing is very iterative, and you can always go backwards. So your themes might make you think of objects or sensations that you forgot. You could also have multiple themes, and this could help you focus and constrain and say, no, you know what, it's really about this one, it's not about these other two. And again, if anything on here doesn't fit, then you don't need to worry about it particularly. Just an invitation. The idea behind this is it's great if you can sit down and write something, that's fine. But a lot of times we don't do enough pre-writing and need to be in that part a little bit more. And this particular exercise kind of slows that down. And for myself, I like to mix things up. So sometimes I might want to be slow like this. Other times I might not. Yesterday, when I wrote that 17 word syllable American haiku, I just sat down and wrote it. Other times it's good to reflect a little more.
Thank you. And Catherine asks, is it better to have something from the past or present for this exercise, or does it work if you do something in the future?
I think anything, any of the above, whatever moves you. So we're going to spend a few minutes listing ideas, then choose one to flesh out into one or more sentences. And at the end of that time, we'll debrief in breakout rooms. And in those rooms, then you'll be able to share whatever you like about your process and your work, and nothing that you don't want to. And the same for the whole group debrief. So happy few minutes of quiet writing. So it looks like some of you might be done or at a stopping place. Yes. Okay. Let us do some debriefs in breakout groups.
You ready for me to send them to the room, Julie?
Yes. And how much time do we have?
We have 8 minutes in the breakout room. That would give us just a few minutes at the end.
Okay.
Or do you want me to change the time?
How many in each room?
4 or 5.
Okay. Okay. Could we do 6 minutes in the breakouts?
Second then.
And just ask you to manage your time in there so that everyone gets a turn.
All right. I'll send people to breakout rooms. You should get a notification and you have to accept to go to the room. Let's try this.
Oh, so James was just talking about what I did with the cards, and I think I remember hearing there was one of the only a famous INTP writer used to use cards for all of their ideas. Can't remember. Was it I remember Lolita. I can't remember the author right now. Nabokov. I thought it was Nabokov. I don't know. About having
Playing
everything kind of
cards
all
or
on
tarot
cards and
cards?
then just kind of putting it all together.
Yeah, like index cards, right?
Yes, index cards, like writing
Mhm.
everything on index cards. So I thought that would actually work well for me, I thought.
Or post-it notes.
Yeah, I use Post-it notes a lot. And anything to debrief? I know some of you have to go. So what's most important? What do you have to share?
That felt like the shortest of all the sessions I've been in. What have we done with the teapot? There, sorry.
Yeah, and the rest is just slides. It has some of books, has some links to my writing, and then some things about the writing process, which again, Terry also has a handout on that's very similar to that. But the writing process, the idea of iteration is so important, because we're not going to sit down and write something beautiful in one go. And it's so much easier to just have something on that page. So there's getting it down there, and then there's everything that you do with it over time later, just like living, right?
Can you recommend any sources of support for exploring this seriously as a writing form for somebody who already writes? So iteration is second nature, all the basics. I've got my thesaurus, I'm published, but I've never explored this particular approach, and the concreteness of it is intriguing me.
There, in my references, I did annotate them lightly, so it'll explain what each one is. I would definitely take a look at Beth Ann's book. Jane is recommending Right from the Start by Anne Loomis. I just got a book by one of my recent teachers. It's has a very evocative title of The Prompt Book, and it's by Barbara Henning. It's not specific to micro memoir, but everything in there applies. She does a lot of flash fiction, and that could certainly be flash nonfiction as well.
Too many ideas.
So many, so
Yeah.
many.
Yeah.
Anything else? I like John liked the 17 syllables, 17 syllable American haiku sentence.
I like the four columns. That was interesting. It reminded me a little bit of the Golden Shovel.
Oh, I don't know that.
That's something like you take a favorite poem and the last word from each line or something like that.
Okay, yes, yes.
And come up with something new. It was interesting.
So Julie, are you okay if I stop the recording now
Yes.
and people can stay and ask questions?
Absolutely.
So thank you so much. Really fascinating session. And I put the link for the handout in case you hadn't got it in the chat. Great content. So thanks very much. We'll keep the link open for about another half an hour if anyone wants to stay and talk with Julie specifically.